This is Diana Sullivan in Austin, Texas, and today I'm going to show you how to make garter stitch edge along your work. This is a little bit of work, and it's definitely a beginner technique that's in many of your manuals, but it did occur to me that I have never ever taught it. So let's do this, and I think you'll be pleasantly surprised that after you do it a little while that you speed up. Now I've done quite a few rows of plain stockinette. One of the big disillusionments that hand knitters go through when they get their hands on a knitting machine is that it does plain stockinette. It does it really, really well, but that is the simplest thing to do, and you can zoom it out, but plain stockinette rolls and curls. And we hand knitters love garter stitch. It doesn't do garter stitch easily. Now we can do garter stitch all the way across with a garter bar, which I've taught, but what if you just wanted 4 garter stitches on the edge? Well, here's how I would do that. My carriage is on the right. Carriage is over here, and you can tell that because there's my yarn end, and on the right I'm going to reform 4 stitches. So I'm moving the stitches out with my finger so you can see those things. I'm putting my tool 1 loop below the needle. So there's the loop on the needle, and then there's a bump, and then there's a loop. That's where I put my tool, and I pull my needle forward and back to make the loop drop. Push my tool down, and look, I made a runner on purpose. Then I latch that up, push my tool forward, get it in the hook. See my loops behind the latch? That way it goes in the loop, super easy. And I've reformed a stitch. Let's do another. Now, machine knitters only do garter stitch by hand in small doses. That is most machine knitters. But the funny thing is, the longer I machine knit, the more I like to do some things by hand. It makes it special. It makes it something that's a little more challenging for me to do. Now, there are 2 ways I might do this. I might want to just have garter stitch on one side of the work, or I might want to have it on both sides of the work. If I want it on both sides of the work, I knit to the left, and now we're going to do it on the left. Again, on the carriage's side. Why am I doing that? I'm just making the end needle a little easier to do. This way the end needle has the yarn coming from it, as opposed to having the loop. Like over here, see, this stitch here would be a little more challenging to do because it's got the this tight place where the yarn changed directions. So hey, we'll just do it on the easy side because I'm the make it easy girl. And here's that last one. And then I knit to the right. And you guessed it, I'm going to do it on the right side, on the last 4 needles. Now, I could shortcut this a little by bringing these needles out to hold, but that makes it harder for you watching in the photographs, in the video, to see what I did. However, it definitely speeds it up for me. And I just realized, because of the angles on this, when I pop over to the left side, you'll be able to see what I'm doing a little better, because the camera will be coming from that side, and the needles pulled out to holding position won't be quite so much in way of the shot. But you see, that sort of reminds me what I've done and I haven't done in case I get interrupted, which in my case is important because I can be distracted. And it also saves me from having to pull the needle out and back. Now here I am in the left doing it that same way. I brought those 4 needles into hold, inserted my tool, dropped my stitch, and rehung my stitch. Now note the importance of playing with this tool. It turns into a transfer tool if you can get the stitch behind the loop. So let me illustrate that carefully. I just want to make sure you can see that little time saver. You see, if you latch it up like this and then you put it on by picking up your tool and aiming at your hook, that's a little more work than if you put your hook in here, drop your stitch, latch it up, and now the putting back is easier if you slide the tool in until the stitch is below the latch, and then you see how when I pull this out the latch closes? I've hooked one hook on the other hook and I can just switch the yarn. Let me get this last one. So hopefully you've been able to see this really well, and hopefully you'll go practice for just a little while and realize that it's not so bad. It's not as bad as it sounds like it would be to do this. And I'm going to do some more rows so we have a nice sample to look at and compare to regular stockinette. Now, I know you're already thinking ahead, and you're saying to yourself, could this be a button band? You bet. This could be the best button band ever, if you have the patience to do it, because this garter stitch will be slightly shorter than the stockinette it's attached to. And this garter stitch will not droop. It'll also be fully reversible, so if your cardigan flips open a little bit, that'll be all right. Now, what I'm going to do, since I just mouthed off and said you could use this for a button band, is I'm going to show you a really simple buttonhole. So I'm going to knit to the left, and before I do my switches on the left, I'll bring those needles out just to remind me to do them. But over here on the right, I'm going to make my super fancy buttonhole. I'm going to take, this is a purl row, it's not going to be reformed. I'm going to take one of these stitches, the third one, and I'm going to move it to the second one and leave it in work. Now that's going to make a hole. It's a simple little hole, but it'll work for us. And then I'll keep going so you can see the hole. So I reformed the stitches on the left, and then I knitted one more row, and my carriage is on the right. See my end? Which means it's time to reform these. Well, I don't have too much I have to do here. The first thing I'm going to do is go ahead and get this one. Now I'm going to reform this one. I'll go down in the loop from the row below, drop that stitch, and I'll knit it through and put it on the needle. This will give us a good buttonhole. And then I'll go ahead and reform the other two. This one's a little tricky because it's got 2 loops, so I managed to get my tool in by using the point. Gave it a twist and used the point. But see, I'm going to draw this through 2 loops to reform it. Little different, but hey, it's going to give us a good buttonhole. And knit to the other side. There's our buttonhole. And I'm going to keep going. Now, one of the reasons I really want you to do this is when you're a beginner, one of your goals, and you don't even know it's your goal yet, is to learn the shape, the formation of the stitch, where the yarn goes, how it feeds through the stitch, how the stitch behaves. reforming stitches is a great way to get that in your head. And as you get that in your head, you'll be able to think of how to do a lot of things on your own. Now I'm going to bind off and just use the loose loop through a loop bind off. I'm going to take this off the machine and show you what we've got. So I'm cutting the yarn. All the needles come out to hold position. And I'll just use my latch tool to do this bind off. After a minute I realize I have too much weight, so I'm taking some weight off. That really was kind of a lot of weight to have on those few stitches that remain. Love this bind off because it looks like a hand knit bind off, but I have to do the last row before the bind off really loosely. So in this case I was on tension 5. I rolled it all the way up to the loosest tension. At the end of the bind off I bring that loose end through the last loop. First of all, here is the part before the garter stitch, and it is totally a tube. It is all rolled up. See that? And then here's the little garter stitch area. Up here we're looking at the purl, and here's the knit side of the garter stitch right here, and you can see a great reduction in rolling up here. And there's my buttonhole. See how I nestled my buttonhole into a knit row? So it's between two purl ridges. By doing it that way, it's the most invisible, best looking itty bitty buttonhole I can do. Now I'm on a bulky machine, and I hardly ever do a 2-stitch buttonhole on a bulky machine. Of course you can, but look, that's a big hole. I can almost get my thumb through that hole. It'll hold a good size button. So do try the 1-stitch buttonhole before you go any bigger. Anyway, that's how to make a garter stitch edge on your knitting.